The statistical anomaly appeared on the Tuesday morning tracking poll just after dawn, a glaring discrepancy that immediately rendered the entire spreadsheet suspect. I sat at my desk in the center of the campaign field office, adjusting the contrast on my dual monitors to reduce the harsh glare against the dimly lit room. I traced my index finger along the cross-tabulation column for the downtown Denver commercial precincts, tracking the numbers row by painstaking row. A sudden 6% drop in voter retention among small business owners simply did not correlate with our established standard deviation margins. In my profession, data does not lie. Furthermore, it does not spontaneously generate wild fluctuations without a concrete, measurable external catalyst. I tapped the spacebar to freeze the dataset, noting the timestamp of the polling shift. Something new, something highly damaging, had been introduced into the local electoral ecosystem at exactly 1400 hours yesterday afternoon. The heavy oak door of the field office blew open with a violent crack, letting in a vicious gust of snowy Denver air and the rattling, low-gear roar of Colfax Avenue morning traffic. Elias, our incredibly patient field director, threw his considerable weight against the wood, fighting the rusted hinges to force it shut against the winter draft. He stomped his heavy boots on the entry mat, sending clumps of gray street slush scattering across the cracked linoleum floor. I did not look up from the screen. My attention remained entirely fixed on the anomaly, mentally calculating the required fiscal adjustments in our localized broadcast spending to compensate for a sudden deficit in a core demographic. "Alistair," a voice called out, cutting cleanly through the low, constant hiss of the overworked office radiator tucked into the far corner of the room. Diana Reed stepped into the center of the bullpen. She was 36, the undisputed frontrunner for the District 4 City Council seat, and currently wearing a heavy, charcoal wool overcoat, heavily dusted with fresh, powdery snow. Her practical, rubber-soled boots left a trail of small, damp imprints on the floor as she walked past the rows of empty phone banking stations. She unwound a thick, knit scarf from her neck, carrying the kinetic, unscripted energy that made her an incredibly formidable candidate on the debate stage, but an absolute logistical challenge for a campaign manager who relied entirely on rigid structure. "Your morning schedule has been severely compromised, Diana," I noted, glancing briefly at the analog wall clock positioned above the main whiteboard. "Pursuant to the itinerary I circulated at 0700 hours, you were expected back from the local radio broadcast station by 0915. It is currently 0942. She walked directly over to my desk, dropping a thick, uncollated stack of volunteer canvassing reports onto the corner of my workspace. The pages slid haphazardly, disrupting my meticulously color-coded filing system. I instinctively reached out to align the cardboard edges, a reflex born from years of organizing chaos. But I stopped myself. My hand hovered over the paper for a fraction of a second. I forced my fingers to pull back, resting them flat on the desk. I deliberately left the stack crooked, a minor, silent concession to her chaotic momentum that I would not have afforded anyone else. The radio host asked an unplanned, aggressive question about the historic district zoning permit on live air, she explained, her tone carrying a subtle, defensive undertone of frustration. She unbuttoned her damp coat, shaking the residual moisture from the wide lapels. I couldn't give him a generic, focus group-tested talking point. The constituents calling into the station were genuinely concerned about the commercial rezoning proposals. The voters in this district deserve a comprehensive answer, not a deflecting, sanitized soundbite. "When you improvise off the approved messaging script, you introduce unnecessary risk," I answered, minimizing the polling spreadsheet and opening the municipal code database to cross-reference her recent public statements. Case in point, we have a sudden, unexplained deficit in the downtown business owner polling numbers this morning. I am currently attempting to locate the source of the hemorrhage. I suspect your improvised, highly nuanced stance on the commercial zoning laws may have triggered a reactionary pushback from the real estate development lobby. Diana sighed, pulling out the cold metal folding chair opposite my desk and sitting down heavily. She did not argue with my blunt, purely analytical assessment. That mutual, unspoken respect for cold reality was precisely why we functioned so effectively together. She intrinsically understood the ruthless mechanics of the political system, even if she deeply preferred the messy, human element of retail politics on the street. "Marcus Vance's team is pushing something behind the scenes," she said, naming the wealthy, deeply entrenched incumbent we were currently trying to unseat. His political surrogates were out in force this morning at the community pancake breakfast. They were handing out unmarked flyers, And every time I tried to engage with a local vendor, Vance's field team deliberately steered the public conversation toward my previous private consulting work. I frowned, a slight tightening of my jaw being the only outward physical indication of my rising concern. I opened a new browser window, bypassing the standard news aggregates and running a targeted Boolean search query directly through the local media index, filtering for specific keywords associated with her old firm. I found the source of the statistical hemorrhage almost immediately. My posture stiffened into absolute, unyielding rigidity as I read the bold headline displayed on the screen. "There is an article," I announced, keeping my voice completely devoid of inflection to prevent an unnecessary wave of panic from spreading to Elias, who was currently organizing voter registration clipboards across the room. It was published by an anonymous municipal watchdog blog yesterday afternoon. It alleges your previous environmental consultancy firm received unauthorized financial kickbacks from a land developer seeking high-density building permits in the downtown commercial corridor. Diana went entirely still. The ambient, low-level noise of the campaign office, Elias dropping a box of ballpoint pens, the winter wind rattling the frosted glass panes seemed to drop away completely. "That is a complete fabrication," she stated firmly, looking directly at me with absolute certainty. "My firm conducted a standard, thoroughly lawful environmental impact study for that specific parcel of land. All financial disclosures and consulting fees were filed correctly with the State Ethics Board 3 years ago. I am entirely aware of the legality and thoroughness of your past financial disclosures," I replied, rotating the monitor outward on its stand so she could read the screen clearly. However, the blog has attached a heavily redacted photograph of an internal development memo from the construction firm. The memo implies a secondary, off-the-books transaction took place. They are weaponizing a vague implication. Left unanswered in the current aggressive media cycle, an implication calcifies into a verified public fact within 72 hours. "So we issue a categorical denial immediately," she decided, leaning forward and placing her hands flat on the edge of my desk, ready to fight. "I will draft a press statement right now. I'll go live on our social media feeds from this office and tell the truth directly to the district." "Negative," I countered instantly, closing the browser window to prevent her from reading the highly inflammatory and entirely fabricated comments populating underneath the article. A reactive, emotional denial inherently validates the premise of their accusation. It places our campaign on the defensive. In this office, we do not operate on emotion or instinct. We operate on concrete documentation. I pulled a blank, yellow legal pad toward me and uncapped my pen. "I require your complete corporate financial archive from that specific fiscal year. I need access to every single bank statement, every independent contractor invoice, and every quarterly tax filing. We will meticulously cross-reference every single ledger line to establish an unassailable chronological timeline before we issue a single syllable to the local press." Diana looked at me, a flare of genuine rebellion tightening her posture. The natural instinct of a community leader is to step up and fight back immediately when their integrity is questioned. "Alistair, thousands of people in this city are reading that hit piece right now. If I stay silent today, if I hide behind no comment, it looks like I am guilty. If you speak without an impenetrable, heavily referenced binder of physical evidence supporting your claims, you give Vance the exact opportunity he needs to shift the goalposts and demand endless clarifications." I instructed, my tone unyielding and authoritative. My methods were battle-tested through 4 brutal election cycles. They were the only thing keeping this campaign viable. We follow the established protocol. The process protects the candidate. Send the authorization email to your former accounting firm immediately. I want the digital archive boxes delivered to my secure server by noon. She held my gaze for 3 long, tense seconds. The frustration in her eyes slowly gave way to practical recognition. She knew my methods were exceptionally rigid, but she also knew they had kept us alive through every previous crisis. She pulled her smartphone from her coat pocket and began rapidly typing the formal authorization email. We were going to win this escalating conflict on the facts, regardless of how tedious the methodology proved to be. By Wednesday evening, the atmospheric pressure in the Denver field office had reached a critical, stifling low. The viral rumor had successfully breached the obscure municipal blogs and entered the mainstream local television news cycle. Our digital media monitoring software had flagged 34 separate, highly negative mentions of the alleged kickback scandal within a 4-hour window on local broadcasts. The radiator hissed violently in the corner, pumping dry, oppressive heat into a room that somehow still felt entirely too cold and uninviting. I sat alone at the primary, scuffed wooden conference table, completely surrounded by 6 meticulously organized stacks of printed financial ledgers. I had been cross-referencing the consultancy's expenditure reports against the municipal tax code for the last 9 consecutive hours. Every comma was accounted for. Every decimal point was strictly verified against the corresponding certified bank statements. Elias walked heavily into the conference area, gripping his smartphone tightly. His usual optimistic, rallying demeanor was entirely absent. "Vance just escalated," he reported, dropping exhaustedly into a plastic chair. "He just filed a formal petition with the City Ethics Committee. He is demanding an emergency, comprehensive audit of Diana's current campaign finances, claiming the blog post constitutes reasonable public suspicion of ongoing financial malfeasance." I adjusted my glasses, carefully placing a yellow highlighter completely parallel to the edge of my legal pad. The municipal charter explicitly requires a burden of preliminary, physical proof to initiate an emergency audit within 60 days of an active election. Vance is attempting to bypass standard evidentiary procedure to orchestrate a highly damaging media spectacle. Well, he successfully bypassed it, Elias grimaced, rubbing the back of his neck in frustration. The committee accepted the formal petition 20 minutes ago. They are sending an independent, state-appointed auditor here to the field office tomorrow morning at 0800 hours. They want absolute, unhindered access to the physical records. I felt a sharp, distinct spike of professional annoyance at the blatant procedural irregularity. A sudden, unscheduled inspection day was a tactical disruption specifically designed to halt our voter outreach efforts and force our field staff into administrative paralysis. I looked up toward the back of the room. Diana was standing in the doorway of her private office. She looked deeply exhausted, the relentless, grinding strain of the public smear campaign visible in the slight, uncharacteristic tension pulling at the corners of her mouth. "They're trying to freeze our operational capacity," she said, stepping slowly into the main room, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. "If the auditor is occupying this office tomorrow, demanding meetings, I cannot attend the downtown merchants' luncheon at noon. That is our absolute most critical demographic right now. Vance knows that. He intentionally timed this audit specifically to keep me off the floor and away from the voters. You will absolutely attend the luncheon," I declared, opening a fresh legal document on my laptop and rapidly formatting the header. The Municipal Ethics Code clearly stipulates that the official campaign manager may act as the primary, legally binding liaison for any emergency audit, provided the candidate signs a formal delegation of authority waiver. You will go to the luncheon and secure the business demographic. I will remain here and handle the auditor. Diana walked slowly over to the conference table. She looked down at the thousands of pages I had arranged, categorized, and indexed with colored tabs. "Alistair, the state auditors are notoriously aggressive when they smell blood in the water. If they find a single clerical error, a misplaced receipt, a misdated invoice from a printer, Vance will immediately leak it to the press as definitive proof of systemic corruption. They will not find an error," I assured her. I dropped my usual formal, projecting volume, allowing my voice to soften slightly, to offer genuine, grounded reassurance. Because I have spent the last 9 hours preemptively auditing the entire archive against their own guidelines, the financial architecture of this campaign is structurally flawless. She watched me in silence. The defensive tension in her jaw slowly relaxed, smoothing out the lines of sheer exhaustion on her face. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her mobile phone, and set it completely face down on the wooden table. It was a conscious, deliberate physical action to disconnect from the external panic and place her trust entirely in my defensive systems. "Show me the delegation waiver," she requested quietly. "I will sign it right now." Before she walked back to her office, she paused by the small kitchenette. A few moments later, she returned and silently placed a steaming ceramic mug on the edge of my desk, ensuring it didn't touch any of the ledgers. "Thank you for holding the shield," she whispered. A brief, genuine microchemistry beat that momentarily cut through the sterile tension of the room, before she turned and walked away. The state-appointed auditor arrived at the office at exactly 0800 hours the following morning. He was a stern, gray-haired man named Mr. Harrison, who carried a heavily scuffed leather briefcase and smelled faintly of stale diner coffee and damp wool. I met him at the front reception desk wearing a fully tailored, dark navy suit, my posture deliberately rigid and formal. I did not offer him small talk, nor did I offer him coffee or a comfortable chair. I offered him a meticulously tabulated, color-coded index of our accounting records. We sat in the windowless back office under the harsh, buzzing glare of fluorescent lighting. Mr. Harrison attempted to assert dominance early in the process, requesting specific, highly obscure transaction records from the third quarter of a fiscal year 3 years prior. I produced the corresponding documentation from my indexed boxes instantly, sliding the paper across the table without a single word of hesitation. The turning point occurred during the third hour. The atmosphere had turned decidedly adversarial. He attempted to formally flag a discrepancy regarding a catering expenditure from a volunteer outreach rally. Before he could even finish articulating the accusation, I interrupted him. I refer you to Section 12, Clause 4, Subsection B, of the State Campaign Finance Manual, I recited smoothly from memory, which explicitly exempts individual food and beverage costs under $200, specifically allocated for volunteer training sessions. The receipt in your hand is for $184. The expenditure is entirely compliant. He stared at me, his pen hovering over his clipboard. He realized he was not fighting a disorganized, frantic political campaign. He was fighting an exhausting wall of regulatory knowledge. The process quickly devolved into a grueling battle of administrative attrition. I countered every single inquiry with a precise citation of the legal code. By early afternoon, his aggressive, interrogative posture had entirely slumped into sheer professional fatigue. At 14:30 hours, Mr. Harrison clicked his leather briefcase shut with a heavy sigh. Your records are entirely in order, Mr. Price, he conceded, rubbing his eyes beneath his thick glasses. I will file a preliminary report with the Ethics Committee this afternoon stating that the petition lacks any evidentiary support for a deeper investigation. When I finally walked out into the main office, the late afternoon sun was beginning to cast long, pale shadows across the floor. Diana had just returned from the merchant's luncheon. The snow on the shoulders of her coat was beginning to melt into dark, damp patches. She looked at me from across the room, a silent, desperate question evident in her posture. The audit is officially clear, I announced to the room at large. A collective, massive breath left the room. Elias slumped over his desk, burying his face in his hands in profound relief. Diana closed her eyes for a brief, vulnerable second. She walked toward my desk, unbuttoning her coat. Thank you, she said, her voice rich with gratitude. I simply verified the mathematics. The truth required no alteration, I replied, maintaining my professional baseline. She smiled, a knowing, dry expression. I'm making tea. Green tea. Steeped for exactly 3 minutes. No sugar, I confirmed, allowing a brief, dry smile to touch my own features. It was a comforting, evolving domestic anchor in the absolute middle of a chaotic political war zone. We had successfully won a critical defensive battle, and Elias chuckled from across the room at our rigid tea routine, providing a much-needed moment of levity. But the relief was temporary. Vance still controlled the broader public narrative. The true escalation arrived on a Friday night, precisely during a severe, citywide blizzard warning. The office was mostly empty, the junior staff having been sent home hours ago to avoid the hazardous, icy road conditions. The winter wind howled aggressively against the brick building, violently rattling the frosted window panes. I sat at my desk, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark room. My phone buzzed violently against the wood. A high-priority red alert from our digital monitoring service flashed across the screen. A prominent local news outlet had just published a leaked private document, a supposed, highly confidential contract between Diana's old firm and the controversial land developer. The PDF image included a signature at the bottom of the final page that matched hers perfectly. The accompanying article framed the contract as the definitive, undeniable proof the Ethics Committee had somehow missed during the audit. Vance had immediately issued a press release demanding she withdraw from the municipal race by Monday morning. Diana, I called out, my voice slicing sharply through the quiet room. She walked swiftly out of her office, reading the screen over my shoulder. I felt the sudden, terrifying stillness in her physical presence. That is my signature, she whispered, her voice tight with absolute shock. But I never signed that document. I explicitly rejected that developer's proposal in writing. The terms listed there are entirely fabricated. A sudden, incredibly unfamiliar surge of pure, unadulterated anger spiked violently in my chest. The blatant, calculated attack on her integrity felt intensely personal, a severe violation of the fundamental rules of engagement I lived my life by. My hand gripped the edge of my desk hard enough that my knuckles turned stark white. I took a slow, deep, measured breath, forcing the irrational emotion down into a compartmentalized box and deliberately replacing it with cold, relentless methodology. If you did not sign it, the document is a fabrication, I said, my voice steadying as I immediately downloaded the high-resolution PDF file from the news outlet's server. I opened an advanced metadata extraction tool on my secondary monitor, and if it is a fabrication, the architect left behind digital flaws. I zoomed in on the pixel structure of the document. Look at the kerning. I pointed to the text surrounding the signature line. The spacing between the individual letters in the final paragraph is exactly 1.15 millimeters. The spacing in the signature block below it is 1.02. This is a digital composite image. Someone pasted your signature over a different document. My fingers moved rapidly across the mechanical keyboard, running a background diagnostic script. Furthermore, the hidden digital properties of this PDF indicate that the file was originally created yesterday morning at 0900 hours. It was generated using a specific version of Adobe software that was not commercially released until 2 full years after the date printed at the top of the contract. Diana exhaled a shaky, disbelieving breath, stepping back from the screen. Vance forged it. He actually forged a legal document. I am securely transmitting this file to Dr. Eris, our retained digital forensic consultant in Washington, right now, I told her, already drafting the encrypted email and attaching the file. I am requesting a sworn, notarized affidavit confirming this metadata analysis by tomorrow morning. We hold a massive press conference tomorrow, Diana decided, her natural fighting energy surging back into her posture. We invite every major affiliate in the state and project this metadata onto a screen. I place my hands flat on the desk, shaking my head. A press conference is entirely insufficient. In this scenario, we do not simply defend our position. We dismantle the opponent's leverage permanently. The city charter dictates that an officially recorded, formal city election forum will take place this Sunday evening in a town hall format. Vance will absolutely attempt to use this fraudulent document against you on a live broadcast to maximize his optical advantage. We will let him. She stared at me, processing the cold mechanics of the strategy. You want him to spring the trap on live television? Once he physically presents a forged document in a formalized public setting with the explicit intent to alter an election, I finished, my voice resolute. He violates Section 8 of the Municipal Election Fraud Statute. It elevates the act from a simple smear campaign to a criminal misdemeanor. The silence in the room stretched out, accompanied only by the rattling of the winter wind against the glass. You are incredibly, terrifyingly ruthless when you want to be, Alistair. I pulled a physical, leather-bound notebook from my top drawer, a rare deviation from my strictly digital organizational systems. I carefully wrote down the date and location of the upcoming town hall with a red pen, underlining it twice. I am simply thorough. She walked to the kitchenette, retrieved 2 ceramic mugs, and set a perfectly steeped cup of green tea down directly beside my notebook. We sat together in the quiet, drafty office, the blizzard raging outside the glass, and meticulously mapped out the final, procedural steps of the ambush. The Sunday town hall was held in the cavernous gymnasium of a local community center. The wooden bleachers were completely packed, with constituents wearing heavy, snow-dampened winter coats. The air in the room was thick with political tension and the distinct smell of wet wool. I stood out of sight, positioned directly behind the heavy blue velvet curtain stage left. I held a thick, black leather binder tightly against my chest. It contained the certified metadata analysis, the original pixel comparison charts, and the sworn, legally binding digital forensics affidavit from Dr. Eris. Vance adjusted his microphone on the right side of the stage. His demeanor was dripping with manufactured, solemn concern. The voters of Denver deserve absolute transparency from their elected officials, he began, looking out over the crowd, his shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. And frankly, my opponent has failed to provide it. This week, a highly disturbing contract surfaced, proving Miss Reed facilitated a corrupt zoning deal that hurt our local businesses. He reached inside his suit jacket and held up a freshly printed copy of the forged document. The camera operators at the back of the room immediately zoomed in on the paper. She has ignored the questions. The proof is right here, with her explicit signature. A low, negative murmur went through the crowd. The social pressure in the room was immediate, heavy and intensely hostile. Diana did not flinch. She did not lean away from the microphone. She looked out at the hostile crowd, her posture projecting absolute, unshakable authority. Transparency requires actual facts, Marcus, she stated, her voice echoing cleanly through the terrible acoustics of the gymnasium. Not amateur fabrications. She turned her attention directly to Vance, locking eyes with him across the stage. The document you are currently holding up to those cameras was digitally created exactly 72 hours ago. My team has extracted the hidden digital metadata from the source file. The specific software used to generate that PDF did not exist on the date printed at the top of the page. My signature was digitally grafted from an entirely different environmental impact report. Vance's confident, arrogant posture visibly cracked. He lowered the paper slightly, his eyes darting nervously toward his campaign manager sitting in the front row. These are desperate, highly technical excuses. They are verifiable, empirical facts, Diana countered, her tone completely calm and devoid of anger. She looked over her shoulder, toward the side of the stage. Alistair. I stepped out from behind the heavy blue curtain. I did not seek the spotlight, but I carried the literal mechanism of our victory in my hands. I walked across the polished wooden floor, my strides measured, deliberate, and perfectly paced. The massive room went entirely quiet, thousands of eyes tracking my movement. I approached the moderator's table in the center of the stage and placed the black leather binder squarely down in front of her. I am formally submitting a certified, notarized forensic analysis of the document in question to the public record. I spoke clearly into the secondary microphone. Pursuant to the strict laws governing this municipal election, knowingly presenting a forged document to improperly influence voter behavior constitutes a Class B misdemeanor. I looked directly at Vance. Elias, our field director, formally logged the filing receipt and timestamp for this exact evidence binder with the district attorney's office exactly 30 minutes before this broadcast began. The chain of custody is absolute. I stepped back, yielding the floor entirely back to Diana. I had built the impenetrable structure. She was the voice that would carry it forward. The fallout from the town hall ambush was rapid, systematic, and devastatingly effective. By Monday morning, the phones in our field office stopped ringing with angry constituent complaints for the first time all week. Elias actually lowered himself into his desk chair and laughed out loud once, an exhausted, disbelieving sound, like his lungs had just remembered how to properly function. Vance's campaign manager officially resigned his position by Tuesday afternoon, citing irreconcilable strategic differences. The local news stations completely retracted their initial hit pieces, replacing them with a detailed, damning breakdown of the digital forgery in the pending DA investigation. The campaign office was exceptionally quiet that evening. The snow had finally stopped falling, leaving the downtown Denver streets covered in a pristine, reflective white layer that gleamed under the street lamps. I sat alone at my desk, utilizing my red pen to carefully line edit the final draft of Diana's upcoming transportation policy speech. I methodically crossed out a passive verb, replacing it with a definitive, stronger action word. Diana walked out of her private office. She had left her heavy coat draped over her chair. She approached my desk slowly, the frenetic energy of the campaign trail completely absent from her movements. She stopped at the edge of my workspace, quietly watching me edit the paper. The latest polling numbers just came in from the regional director, she said quietly, her voice carrying a profound sense of peace. We are currently up by 12 points across all key demographics. Vance is actively pulling his television ad buys for the remainder of the week. We are going to win the election. The statistical probability of our ultimate victory is currently operating at 94.7%, I agreed, defaulting instinctively to the familiar safety of the numerical data. She smiled, a soft, incredibly tired curve of her lips. She reached into her trouser pocket and pulled out a small, printed plastic card attached to a lanyard. It was an official access badge for the secure executive floor of City Hall. She set it down gently on my desk, placing it right next to my red pen. The mayoral transition team is already allocating permanent office space for the incoming council members, she told me, her eyes dropping to the badge, then rising to meet mine. They need the official name of my chief of staff submitted to Human Resources by Friday afternoon. This is a professional job offer, Alistair. Your answer is entirely yours, and whatever you decide, it doesn't change the immense respect I have for you. The plastic badge tapped lightly against the metal casing of my red pen. I looked at the municipal seal printed clearly on the plastic. The chief of staff role requires a highly significant amount of bureaucratic navigation and an immense tolerance for public-facing inefficiency, I noted, my voice losing its rigid, formal volume, dropping into a quieter, more personal register. I know exactly what it requires, Diana replied, taking a half-step closer to the edge of the desk. She turned her head, looking across the room toward Elias, who was currently packing up a box of canvassing materials. Elias, she called out, her voice clear and authoritative. Make sure the morning briefing packets are copied and formatted for our new chief of staff by tomorrow at 0800. Elias paused, looking over at us. A wide grin broke across his face. He offered a sharp, respectful salute before turning back to his boxes. She had publicly chosen me. It was an undeniable, concrete declaration of my place in her future. I picked up the badge, feeling the hard edges of the plastic. I reached out and turned my mobile phone completely face down on the desk. It was a definitive physical action. For the first time that entire month, I actively stopped checking the incoming data alerts. If I accept this role, I will require your absolute compliance with the bureaucratic filing deadlines, I said, setting my professional boundary clearly. I will sign whatever waivers you put in front of me, she accepted instantly, without a moment of hesitation. She reached across the desk, picked up my red pen, and pulled a blank legal pad toward her. Across the top margin, she wrote the words "Transition Calendar" in neat, definitive letters. Then, she carefully wrote my name right next to hers for the first morning briefing of the new administration. She exhaled deeply, the heavy, accumulated tension of the smear campaign finally leaving her shoulders completely. She looked out the frosted window at the quiet, snowy street, then looked back at me, her expression entirely open. This feels exactly like a dream. Her handwriting dried beside mine on the legal pad. I reached over and closed the polling dashboard on my laptop. The screen went black, silencing the endless feed of statistical variables and anomalies. I slid the municipal badge into my inner jacket pocket, a physical weight that anchored me to this new reality. I answered, "If it's a dream, please don't wake me up." Winning the right way requires patience and an absolute reliance on verifiable facts over emotional reactions. True respect in a partnership means honoring boundaries and building a framework where both people can safely do their best work. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.